Hello and welcome to my woolly PhD. My name is Liz Scarf and this is a weekly vlog all about what I'm learning and making each week in my anthropology PhD, all about wool. And I can't help grinning like an idiot every time I get to say that because I still feel super lucky that I'm getting to do an anthropology about wool, a PhD, and I get to knit as part of my research methodology, which is just like the coolest thing ever. Anyway, enough about my excitement. So if you haven't been watching along and you want to find out what's the project about, you can go to the introductory video in the channel. It just gives you a bit of an overview of the whole thing. But this week I have been revisiting this excellent book, which is Craft and the Creative Economy by Professor Susan Luckman. And I'm a big fan of her work. She does a lot around craft work in Australia and haven't read anywhere near as much of it as I want to yet, but I'll get there. Anyway, I've particularly been looking at chapter 5, which is called Self-Making and Marketing the Crafty Self, which is really about the promotional and aesthetic labour that craftspeople have to do to market and sell products, right? So they have to market themselves, their lifestyles, sort of their broader identity. These are all things they're sort of ways they have to value add a product in order to kind of sell it. So that when we're buying, and let's say wool, we're not just buying wool, we're buying a story about the wool, the maker or the dyer or the, whatever that is, right? I wouldn't say that's anything particularly new in marketing, but what it does for sort of craftspeople and people who are kind of hand making, particularly in gendered ways, is really interesting, right? So she writes about how home-based businesses require people to present stories of this idealised kind of blended work-life spaces and lifestyles, and also a blended and kind of balanced self, like the maker self and then the rest of everything you are. And then that these are also very highly gendered because the majority of people self-employed in craft are women. And particularly in what I'm going to call fibrepreneurs are mostly women as well, right? And one of the points that Susan Luckman makes is that in order to sell these products, right, people have to value add with stories about their lives, but stories of a particular kind, right? And these are effectively performances. It doesn't mean they're inauthentic, but they are having to perform, and they can be inauthentic too, right? People have to exaggerate and exploit aspects of their individuality and have to also kind of sculpt themselves and their stories into some popular tropes or kind of storylines that are very gendered too, right? And so craft has a range of different kinds of these tropes, or sort of myths, we would say, and some of them are about this notion of doing good work, about quality, about care of materials and processes, often about certain ways in their alternative lifestyles. They're environmentally attentive and generally family friendly, but as per sort of heteronormative nuclear family types. And this is one of the ways they're quite problematic, right? Is these tropes are very narrow. There's not a lot of diversity in them actually, and they reinforce some dominant kind of tropes about what it is to be a moral and right and good person, right? So when people are having to connect their life stories to the product, right, they're creating stories of provenance to make the product unique. And this storytelling has also become more and more polished, right? And I'm imagining if you're watching this or listening to this and you are somebody who is a craftpreneur, you're like, this if you've been in the game a long time, the kinds of images you need to have, the kind of staging, the ways in which you need to share personally has become more and more demanding and complex over time, more sort of professional. And also there's ways in which people are kind of compelled to include their children, their partners and their pets in these performances, really kind of further emphasising this idealised integration of family-friendly work sort of businesses. But these also create implications of care and love, like these spaces that are caring and that the products emerge from a space of care and love as well, right? So when we buy the product, we're also trying to buy this sense of care and love. And that it's also compelling makers to perform themselves in non-work contexts, right? So with their family, with their friends, with partners, to sell this idea that this very beautifully integrated life is possible. From my, I say, personal conversations, just in my own life as a maker, people are working really hard with really narrow profit margins often. And so I just think there's a big disjoint, or whatever the word is, between the stories people have to use to sell and the actual lived experience of owning those or operating businesses like that. And I wonder what the impact of that difference is on people, right? Like having to sell this kind of story, but in the background it's like, actually it's quite different. And these performances, right, they go to very deep-rooted kind of processes about identity and self-worth, notions of freedom and control of one's life, and are kind of selling us these kind of perfect or idealised lives, which in my case as a consumer, I'm a sucker for I'll buy the dream of owning some sheep where I'll spend my days giving snuggly scratches to really highly affectionate sheep. Like I have a lot of those on my Instagram feed. It's so cute. And that I would also magically just have lots of really great wool to knit with and lots of time to knit wool. Now I know, I know it's not what it's like having sheep, but I still like the fantasy, right? And I get so curious about the ways in which our craft practices are also kind of held or backgrounded by fantasy as well, and dreams of certain kinds of lifestyles or things that we don't have that we partially connect to through the making practice. And it's not the topic of my research, but I should write that down as a little side quest, because I wonder I haven't seen it, or maybe there is some research on that, but that's really interesting. What are the fantasies that we all have? Anyway, okay, I've just gone off track a little bit. Back on track. So Luckman also sort of says that, being a craftpreneur, which is my term, not hers, actually it's not probably even my term, I'm sure it's around, but she doesn't use that, I should just say. It can be an empowering choice for women, but that's within a context of a lot of inadequate choices for women in terms of economic opportunities, right? Because gender equality is not a reality. But it also does reproduce quite a lot of disempowering gender tropes and individualism and heteronormative family models, right? So for the craftpreneurs or fibrepreneurs who can't produce those tropes, they actually really struggle to succeed in the market, right? And this is a big diversity issue, right? So LGBTQIA people who aren't white, people who aren't slim, people who don't have children, people who have visible or invisible disabilities, right? They will struggle in a market that keeps producing cis, het, white, normative kind of tropes and that people are buying. Now, whether that kind of social awareness thing is your thing or not, right? For the love of diverse products to buy, it's a real issue, right? Because diverse people create diverse products. Except if we only buy very not diverse stories, people have to turn their products into those stories. So it does make me think a lot personally and just sort of reflecting, what are the stories I'm buying? What kinds of bodies and lifestyles are these attached to? And should I be thinking or looking at how to buy more diversely, right? Buy different stories. But on the gendered bit, right, so it requires women to enact a particular performance of femininity, which is actually, it hasn't changed much, right? It's this loving wife and mother, but also the successful businesswoman too, right? So, but with the successful businesswoman part, it's still actually reproducing a very, very long gendered pattern whereby women, or at least middle class and upper class women, right, shouldn't work outside the home. They can work, but it should be home in either housework or craft work, which limits the social spaces and the roles that good women can sort of rightfully take up. And when I was reading this, it also made me curious about some of the stories I've come across, right, where women who were or are like doctors or lawyers or engineers, right, who then create fibercraft businesses either to replace, like they quit their previous career or they added on. I think there's something really interesting going on there, particularly in terms of like performances of gender. And I'm super curious about those stories. But they're certainly a minority, I think. But anyway, I think these gendered performances are the majority of fibrepreneurs, because in the knitting scene, because the majority are cisgendered women. But I am also really interested in the kinds of performances being conducted by male craftpreneurs or fibrepreneurs, particularly same-sex attracted folk in the fibre industries, trans and non-binary folk, and also people with larger bodies and people with impairments or disabilities. Like, they also have to enact certain kinds of performances in order to sell their wares, and using their identity characteristics to varying degrees to sell a story of a certain kind of life. And whether it's like a fabulous gay life or a life of advocacy and activism through their fibercraft, maybe it's about the struggles and the challenges of work and health issues that sort of inspire different kinds of markets in different ways. So I know it's kind of interesting what are the demands on fibrepreneurs in terms of storytelling and adding value to their products, using their identity. And one of the most interesting, well, not maybe the most interesting, but interesting bits in this chapter, something I was like, oh, I had never come across this really, or didn't realise this was a thing. It didn't make sense to me logically, right? It's about how actually with workplace identities, right, this idea that you perform a workplace identity in the workplace, right? It's assumed that men do this, right? That they have a work self that is a performance that is in addition to the rest of themselves, but that women don't. That women are not performing a work identity, it's just their natural selves. And so their labour in producing and performing work identity goes unseen. And I just would have thought it was the other way around, right? Just because of the male entitlement generally means less performativity, I would have thought, right? But even just like the most basic part of these performances, right, about appearance, men traditionally get to wear more or less the same thing to work every day. They don't have to do makeup. And I just thought, how could anyone have ever assumed women weren't performing? Anyway, but it's in the research, and Luckman's a really, really reliable academic, so she's citing sources for this too, right? So it's not dodgy. But anyway, this is going to be also, I think, even more so for fibrepreneurs, right, with home-based businesses. Because all the labour that goes into the performance is even more unseen because it's made to be seamless with the domestic family space. Even when we get these occasional sort of behind-the-scenes posts, or it's not as easy as it looks kinds of posts, or here's an honest blah, 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 I think that they kind of add to the story. They don't detract from it, except if people do it too much. One of the things I think I found most concerning about this at the moment, right, because I'm going to think on this more deeply over time, but it's the hyper-individualism that goes along with it, right? So all these women working essentially on their own, not in collective spaces, and the kinds of economic and labour and psycho-emotional vulnerabilities that this creates for women. Even with great family and friends support, right, it sounds quite isolating. And I'm also not quite sure how good that is as a broader cultural thing, right? Individualism is super problematic. Anyway, so if you're a buyer like me, we can kind of think about who we like to buy from and what are the values or lifestyle stories that grab us, that we're trying to buy, and that therefore we keep reproducing, and we keep kind of creating pressure in the market for people to reproduce that. And do we need to diversify? But also the psychotherapist in me then says, well, can I get closer to that kind of life in some more direct ways other than just through my crafting practice. Like, can I get some sheep? I can't at the moment, but I can go and hang out on sheep farms for a while in a PhD. But so it just makes me think, wow, I wonder how we can get closer to those fantasies or those dreams. And for people in the industry, right, I also wonder for you about the pros and cons of these performances, right? Like maybe they help you become more yourself, or maybe less, right? You kind of feel like become sort of oppressive or like pigeonholing or something. But maybe it also makes you step up and keep your space better, cleaner and tidier and more beautiful, and you really like that. But also maybe it makes you feel like you can't really own your space because it's so performed for cameras. I'm curious about that. I don't imagine producers or people working in the industry are going to kind of disclose that much, particularly publicly in comments. You're welcome to. But I mean, if you've got thoughts about this, it's not part of the research, right? It's just, I'm just interested. If you've got thoughts about it and you want to share them, you're welcome to email me. You'll find the email if you Google me. And I won't share it anywhere, but yeah, and again, not part of the research, just curious. And if you feel like you need somewhere to vent or share, go for it. But yeah, as always, I love to read your thoughts, your comments, reflections, what you've noticed about your own sort of, especially if you're a buyer, the kinds of stories you like to have on your wool. Yeah, and of course, any reading recommendations. I'm always loving those. So that's what I've been thinking about this week. And what have I been making? Okay, so I had another 2 days of first aid training. And so, which if you watched last week, you'll know is a very productive space because it doesn't require my full attention. And so I finished off my 4th Mussleburgh beanie. It's by Ysolda Teague. So this is one side. So this is a double-sided beanie. This is why it's been so wildly popular, and there's at least over 12,000 projects in Ravelry of this pattern. This is the other side. And then it's basically a big long sausage with increases and decreases at the end. Now, this is my 4th one, right? And I made a funny mistake. It's actually for my partner, and I was telling them about, I made a really funny mistake. And they're like, what's funny about it? And I said, I think if you're not a knitter, it might not be so funny, but let me describe it to you anyway. So if you are a knitter, you will probably find this a funny mistake. So this is what the increases and decreases section should look like, right? It's a little cross. So you've got four markers where you do your increases and decreases. Then you knit a long tube. Then at the other end, you do your 4 little cross of decreases, which means you're putting in the 4 markers. They're supposed to be, for my this size, 22 stitches in each quarter. So I put all my markers in, and then my last quarter's got like 24 stitches. And I'm like, how did I do that? So I check and I check and I check. No, they're all right. And I'm like, okay, well, okay, I'll just decrease those 2 out as I go with the other decreases. I'll do them sort of midway and it'll be fine. Anyway, I reckon I got halfway through all the decreases on this, and I realised, and if you can see this, there's 5. I've got a little asterisk kind of star shape here. There's supposed to be 4 across. So I had somehow put in 5 markers, and I didn't even know where I was getting my stitch counts from. But anyway, I was halfway through the decreases and I thought, it's not going to make a big difference. It'll just make the decrease rate quicker. Like this will be a bit shorter, a bit peakier. But because you wear it like this, no one's ever going to know. Well, I mean, except everyone who watches the video. But what's the chance you're ever going to see my partner wearing this? Pretty low. Anyway, so I left it as is. If once they put it on, they're just like, doesn't work. I mean, I think it's fine. The decreases are pretty neat. So anyway, I have no idea how I did that except for, I say lack of paying attention, but I was paying attention. I read the pattern, I knew what was going on. Well, anyway, obviously I did not. So that was funny, but this it's really cool. So you can put the brim up on this or have it down. And this is a really beautiful alpaca alpaca, possum merino I got in New Zealand. So it needs to be blocked. Well, does it? Yes, it does. But yeah, I'm happy that that is finished because my partner lost the other beanies I had made and bought for them. So that's good. So finished that. That's excellent. I have not done very much on my embarrassing sock. The other one was kind of embarrassing. What I did do, and this must be speaking to where my brain is at, I'm not sure. Another mistake, right? So this is a top down. So there's the heel there that I've turned. So in the cuff, at some point, towards the end of doing the cuff, I realised I'd dropped a stitch. I just lost it off the end here, and I thought, oh, okay, well, that'll take me a little moment to fix. Not dramatic or anything. So I won't knit any more on these until I've fixed it and I've put them away and I've been doing other knitting. And then I thought, I want to get on with those, and these could be good to knit in the first aid course. So I better go back and fix them. So I go back. It turns out I was up to like here. I had forgotten that I had to fix the dropped stitch, and at some point gone back and knitted, you know, like another 2 centimeters on them. Fully, like, not even that. I must have like done the heel. Anyway, I must have done a bunch on them, forgetting that I had this dropped stitch to pick up. So anyway, it was about here where I realised, okay, I will just, so anyway, I picked it up all the way through and then just looped a spare bit of thread through and gave a little tug, and I'll just have to weave it in. So anyway, weird. I don't know. I don't know at all. I don't know if I need to be worried or if it's just a short-term blip, or it's like, that's how it goes when you're knitting. There's always a mistake. It's okay. That's part of what's kind of cute about it, right? Anyway, but the big exciting thing that I have been working on, now that I have a little bit more time for knitting, is so great. Look where I'm up to in my, oh God, it's chaos, in my Faerdy vest. So this is a bottom up. First time I've done bottom up actually. And so I finished that first motif, that first pattern, and I'm just sort of partway into the second bit. And if you want to see the colours, I can stretch it out nicely. It's so gorgeous. I love this one so much. So the colourway, so this is by Gudrun Johnson, and the colourway is by Alisha Edmiston, and I set a goal for 2025 to kind of get better at colours and picking colours, because I don't feel like I'm really kind of acing it in the ways that I like. I've got a very narrow window of what I like, and trying to work all that together. So one of the things I'm doing is just going and copying the work of people whose work I'm just like, oh, that's exactly what I love. And so I'll make that. And that's part of the learning of going, oh, okay, I like those colours together. And I'll also be experimenting and stuff too, but that's another way to learn, right, is to copy or emulate things that you do like, and you get more of a sense of it. And this is all in Jamieson's of Shetland, their spindrift yarn, which is really nice. So I'm very happy about that. And if you've been watching for a while, you might remember that this is also partly an experiment in buying yarn for a specific project instead of just randomly buying yarn and then trying to find a project to make it fit. And I have to say I really like it. Because sometimes I'll be knitting something and I'm like, you know what, I just don't totally love it. I really don't want to be knitting things I don't totally love. And so I'm totally loving this and I just want to knit it all the time. And that's really, really nice. And I'm like, all the colours are right, it's the right wool, like nothing feels off about it. And that's really nice. So I am still undecided about whether to go to Bendigo or not and buy random yarn. We'll see. Yeah, so that's what I've been making. But I did also want to tell you about, I forgot last week, these earrings I found. Aren't they cute? I got these at the Parliament shop. So you can buy them at the Parliament shop if you want. These are called the Coastal Rope earrings. And the maker says rope, but really, that's yarn. I'm calling it yarn. So I got little yarn earrings. They're super cute. They are by a maker called Martha Jean, or the company. It's a little Australian company from the Mornington Peninsula in Victoria. And they don't make everything in Australia, but those they make here. And this, I wanted to show you because I love it. This is the Meissa Pullover by Savoury Knits in a very stunning merino alpaca yarn by Adagio, not sure how to say it, Mills. And it's so soft, so divine. It's probably a little bit too drapey for this pattern, but not by much. So I think that's very worth it. Looking around thinking, I must be making other things. But no, I'm spending as much time on that vest, the slip over, as I can. Yeah, that's it this week. See you next week. Thanks for watching. Have a great life. Bye.